Anti-Semitism became politically correct again.
Became acceptable.
It became a tool in mainstream politics. The radical right and the radical left is using anti-Semitism in politics. The demonstrations and attacks in Europe started not on October 8th and not on October 9th, when there was already a beginning of an Israeli response. It started on 12:30 on October 7th. Hamas put in a call to start violent demonstrations. To support this massacre, many anti-Semites, they came out the 7th of October from the closet and said, okay, now is the time to show that we hate Jews, we want to get rid of the Jews in Europe as well.
Welcome to this episode of East to West. Our guest today is Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt, the president of the Conference of European Rabbis, joining us to discuss the significant rise in anti-Semitism following the October 7th attacks and the future of Jewish communities in Europe. Rabbi Goldschmidt, one of the most prominent rabbis in Europe, represents over 800 Jewish communities spanning from Ireland to Russia and has become the leading voice of Judaism in Europe. Established in 1956, the CER has worked tirelessly to defend the religious rights of Jews and continues to play a central role in shaping the Jewish experience across the continent. Rabbi Goldschmidt, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me.
Now, as the president of the Conference of European Rabbis, as I mentioned, you represent over 800 Jewish communities across Europe. We've unfortunately witnessed an alarming surge in anti-Semitism since the October 7th massacre, which has had a profound impact on Jews around the world, and especially in Europe. We've heard of Jews taking off their kippah in public, taking off their mezuzot, out of fear of being attacked. Can you share some of the anti-Semitic experiences your communities have reported to you?
I think that besides the disappearing mezuzot, you have a lot of other results of this new wave of anti-Semitism, which has started with the 7th of October. And one of them is actually the change of pattern of the Jewish vote in Europe. Jews in Europe traditionally voted always for the center parties, either center right or center left. Jews always voted for the center parties because they believed in the European project and European Union, in diversity, in democracy, and believing that being a minority within many minorities in the European Union is beneficial for a Jewish future. And what we have seen in the last few months in elections, especially in France, where in a suburb of Paris, in Sarcelles, 70% of the Jews voted for an extreme right party. And why? It wasn't because they thought that democracy and unity is important. No, because the issue of personal security became the most prevalent, the most important issue. But when we have seen the pogroms in November, after the game of Maccabi in Amsterdam, what was the reaction of the authorities in Amsterdam? In Holland, I went to see the foreign minister of Holland a few days after that. I told him, the whole world is looking at you. What will be your reaction to this pogrom in Amsterdam? And you know what happened? The harshest sentence, which was given out to those people taking part in those riots, pushing people into the grachtes, into those canals in the middle of the winter, and ramming people with cars, was 6 months. A 6-month sentence. What kind of response is that? I met with the Vice President of the European Commission last week, with Martin Brunner, who is in charge of internal security in the European Union. I told him that we want to start an inquiry, the way the Dutch government responded, or better said, didn't respond to those riots in Holland. So, on the other hand, if we're talking about the situation of Jews since the 7th of October 2023, I think the greatest change which happened was that anti-Semitism became politically correct again. It is again a tool.
It became acceptable.
It became acceptable. It became a tool in mainstream politics. The radical right and the radical left is using anti-Semitism in politics.
To that point, how has your organization taken to respond to this rising tide of anti-Semitism, and specifically working with these European leaders in order to fight this blatant hatred, which, as you said, has become politicized and acceptable?
We are in dialogue with all the governments in Europe through our constituencies, with our member communities, with our rabbis. We are in dialogue with the European Commission, with the European Parliament, with those responsible of the security of Jewish communities and Jewish individuals. And here I would like to tell you the good news. The good news is that with all those demonstrations and attacks and foiled terror attacks against the Jewish communities, especially in Germany, maybe one Jewish person was killed since the 7th of October on European soil by anti-Semitic forces. But here we have a problem now. The Europeans find out about planned terror attacks. Who tells them about it? It is the CIA. In 90% of the cases, it is the CIA who gives the information to European Secret Service in different countries that Iran is about to, or Hezbollah or another group is about to attack a Jewish community center, a synagogue, a school. Now, with the new world we live in, the last 2 weeks, and the great divergence between Europe and the United States, and speaking about the European army, speaking about European independence from the United States, you have Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, saying we need a new leader for the free world. And with Marco Rubio, who is the foreign minister of the United States, refusing to meet the foreign minister of the European Union, Kaja Kallas. I think that, and this was my message also to the European leadership, we need, besides investing in European defense and in European armies, there has to be a European center of intelligence to gather the intelligence of upcoming threats and attacks from without and from within Europe.
In these dialogues that you've had with these European leaders, do you feel like they truly understand the problem that the Jewish communities are facing?
The answer is yes, because today the threat of anti-Semitism does not only affect or threatens the Jewish community, it threatens the core being and the future of Europe, because anti-Semitism is used as a political tool. It is let's talk about the attack in Berlin on Friday in front of a Holocaust memorial, when a Syrian refugee who took refuge in Germany attacked with a knife a Spanish citizens at the Holocaust memorial. Now, why did this happen 3 days before the elections in Germany? I believe that as many of those demonstrations in the universities, in the US, also in Europe, they were not spontaneous. It was organized. And in many cases, those attacks against Jewish individuals, they thought that this person at the Holocaust memorial was Jewish, was not Spanish, was actually a way of deepening the insecurity of the European citizen and strengthening the far right parties which want to discard with the European project and go back in time. So I think in the increase of attacks, of knife attacks, of terror attacks before the elections is actually connected.
Well, it seems like the slogan, "The West is next," is really coming true, unfortunately.
It is, in 2015, when there was the terrible attack in Paris of Charlie Hebdo, the Conference of European Rabbis came out with a manifesto of how to fight religious extremism. And we came up with 3 suggestions, which were accepted partially by some European countries, of demanding transparency of the financial support religious congregations are getting inside the European Union, that money coming from either from governments or from organizations promoting terror or hate or anti-Semitism should be refused. And number 2, that also the imams in Europe have to be educated and formed in Europe by European institutions which
right,
can
and
be
not being
controlled.
Formed in countries like Tunisia and
exactly. So Austria and France have taken our advice and have instituted those programs already. Other parts of Europe are doing this right now, but we believe that since then the world has changed again. Today, most of the attacks are done by people who are radicalized, not in mosques, but on the internet. And the internet has to be monitored. And here, there's a huge fight between, I would say, the big tech, saying Twitter, Facebook, and others, and the European Union. The European Union says that the platforms are responsible for hate speech and hate content on X or on Facebook, and they're going to be responsible for it, and they're going to be fined for it, while Elon Musk and others are fighting for total liberty and that anyone can post anything on the internet.
Freedom of speech, as we saw with Kanye West's anti-Semitic rant not long ago, that went unpunished.
So I would say that the Jewish community in Europe is totally behind the European position, which enacted the DSA, the Digital Service Act, which makes the use of platforms punishable. And because we believe that a very big percentage of the radicalization of youth in Europe is today because of the internet.
Are there specific regions or countries in Europe where members of your Jewish communities that you represent feel especially in danger?
I think that for a long time France was the most dangerous spot in Europe. There are places where the police is extremely weak. For example, Brussels. Some parts of Brussels are like the Wild West, with gangs shooting each other on entrances of the subway. But in general, I would like to say that the governments and authorities have been working together with the Jewish communities to provide security to Jewish communities in Europe.
We've spoken about the European non-Jewish leaders, about the role that they have to take. But I want to ask you, in the face of this growing anti-Semitism, what role can Jewish education and community engagement play in combating this hate and fostering more of an understanding amongst the diverse populations in Europe?
No, we believe in dialogue with the governments. We do believe in dialogue with our neighbors, with our Christian neighbors, and with our Muslim neighbors, and also with our atheist neighbors. And the Conference of European Rabbis has engaged in that in the past. We have established the Muslim-Jewish Leadership Council under the roof of Qayisid, which is a Saudi interreligious center, which was in Vienna, is now in Lisbon. And to say the truth, since the 7th of October, the dialogue with our Muslim counterparts and religious leadership has become very, very difficult. And
what are some of the biggest challenges you face in those dialogues?
The biggest challenge we face that when Muslim leaders, and we're sitting with moderate leaders, want to speak up against violence, against attacks against Jews, they're being silenced and they're being threatened by their communities. I'll give you an example. Right after October 7th, one very important Muslim leader from Europe sent us a long statement condemning the Hamas massacre on October 7th. We posted this on our website of the Conference of European Rabbis, and a few hours later he calls us up and asks, please take it down because I'm being threatened by people in my community.
Wow.
So there are moderate leaders of the Muslim community in Europe is mostly an immigrant community coming in from Morocco, from Turkey.
North Africa, the Middle East.
Right. And what is very important is to empower and strengthen those moderate leaders. And this has not been done till now.
How can we actually empower those moderate leaders? Because I think it also comes from the bottom up with education.
It is, yeah, but it is not only education, it is also protection. We should offer them protection, and we should, and the European as well as the different states should empower them and strengthen them by, if some of those leaders need police protection, so they should get police protection.
We've spoken about anti-Semitism and obviously the major concerns that go along with it, but there's also been many positive, if we can say that, stories that have emerged since October 7th of Jewish resilience and solidarity. It feels like there's sort of been a renewal of that Jewish identity, specifically in the diaspora. Do you have any stories that you can share about that?
Yes, it is definitely true. We have seen, right after October 7th, we have seen people who never showed up in a synagogue, just showing up. And, you know, for a lot of people who being Jewish was a secondary identity or something, you know, I'm also Jewish, right?
Yeah.
But not something which I have to think about it on a daily basis, right? So the pogrom on 7th of October, where basically it was the biggest pogrom since the Holocaust, put at the door of every Jew and every Jewish family, again, the existential threat of being Jewish, meaning that your existence, your physical existence as a Jew is being threatened. Now, there's something else which is extremely important. The demonstrations and attacks in Europe started not on October 8th and not on October 9th, when there was already a beginning of an Israeli response. It started on 12:30 on October 7th. Hamas put in a call to all the Muslim centers in Europe to start violent demonstrations to support this massacre. And the way I understand it is that just many anti-Semites who were till now in the closet, who thought, you know, I hate Jews, I don't like Jews, I hate Israel, but they're strong, it's not worthwhile to show it. They came out the 7th of October from the closet and said, okay, now is the time to show that we hate Jews, we want to get rid of the Jews in Europe as well.
When we're speaking about those protests, specifically, as you mentioned, that started on the 7th October, before there was any sort of entrance of Israeli troops into Gaza, this was really the day of the attacks. How do you think that European leaders and also authorities responded to those protests? Do you think that they responded adequately?
I think the governments responded adequately. I think civil society, talking about the arts, people in academia, the churches, were much less responsive. And here we can see a lot of improvement. And as the war was dragging on in Gaza, Israel got less and less support, and Israel was seen less as the victim and more as the aggressor. And but this did not change the image of Israel as being a weakened country with a weakened defense system. And I think this changed again in a cardinal way after the successful elimination of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And we see that after the end of the war with the Lebanese terrorists, the Lebanese arm of the Iranians, I think that there was also again a change in perception that Israel is not as weak as we thought it was, and really Israel, even though it had a terrible moment at the 7th of October when nothing was working, however, Israel is still capable of defending itself.
We saw in those pro-Palestinian protests on the streets of London, police officers telling Jews wearing a kippah who were just walking by these protests to remove themselves from the situation, to cross the street because their presence was a provocation to the protests. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Police reacted in different ways, in different countries, in different cities. Sometimes in the same cities, they reacted in one way one day, and the next day they react in a different way. I think that we should definitely look at the situation today, at the results. Question number one, can Jews today walk in security in the streets of Europe?
What's your answer?
In many places, yes, and in some places, not. For example, there's a place in Berlin, there's a neighborhood called Neukölln. I wouldn't advise any Jewish child to walk around with a kippah. So there are no-go zones.
It's very sad in 2025.
It is definitely sad, but that's the reality. And there's been also, in academia, there's been a certain boycott of Jews, of Israel, of Israeli universities. And here, I think that the Jewish community in Europe is doing a lot to break Israel out of its isolation, which certain isolation which happened as a result of this conflict, which started on October 7th.
I think that there's a profound misunderstanding of what anti-Semitism is versus racism towards other races and other ethno-religious groups. Can you perhaps, for our viewers who aren't Jewish, who might not necessarily understand the root of anti-Semitism and just how deep-seated it is in history, give them a little bit of a better understanding of what it truly is?
I think what sets anti-Semitism apart from other prejudices and other types of racism is that, and here I'm going to quote my predecessor, who was the co-president of the Conference of European Rabbis, Lord Jonathan Sachs, who said that anti-Semitism is like a virus, which always mutates itself. As long as Europe was religious, anti-Semitism was religious. When Europe became secular, anti-Semitism took a secular racist image. And since the Holocaust, when anti-Semitism was totally discredited, and it was not, here I'm using a German word, not salonfähig, it wasn't respectable to be an anti-Semite. So anti-Semitism disguised itself in its new form as being anti-Zionist, the state of Israel. So I think that this is very unique in terms of the prejudice of anti-Semitism. Here we see that in the communist world, Jews were hated because they were the internationalists, they were the bankers, they were the representatives of the capitalist world. In the capitalist world, Jews were hated because they were Jewish communists. In wealthy societies, they hated the Jews because these were the newcomers, these were the immigrants, they were the poor people. And in poor societies, the Jews were hated because they were the rich. So anti-Semitism, in many ways, has no explanation. It is there, it is disguised as evil, it always changes its face. It changes its place, and it's always a great challenge to see it in its true form.
Throughout this conflict and these protests against Israel's actions in Gaza to dismantle Hamas and bring back the hostages, there's been a lot of criticism towards Israel. But unfortunately, that criticism, which of course everyone is allowed to criticize whatever country for its policies, often borders to anti-Semitism. And I think that connection between anti-Semitism and being anti-Israel is often misunderstood by people who aren't Jewish and who don't necessarily understand the connection between Jews and Israel and how much we are very much an ethno-religious group where we are connected to the land, and the land is very much part of our practices, our holidays, our daily prayers. Can you maybe give a little bit of a better understanding for people who don't understand that connection?
For 2,000 years, the world got accustomed to see Jews as victims. And the Jews were not fighting back. It was always the Jews, the victims. You take a look at all the Holocaust movies. It was always the Jews, the victims, not the Jews, the fighters.
Yeah.
So
until Paul Newman came around.
Right. So a lot of people have a problem with Jews fighting back, Jews protecting themselves, Jews defending themselves. It is, and it's much less popular. And number two, in many ways, and here we're going back to the Christian origins of anti-Semitism, actually the Jews, because they rejected Jesus of Nazareth, basically lost their place as being the people chosen by God to live in the land of Canaan or the land of Israel, and they were exchanged for the Catholic Church, which was actually the real Knesset Israel, the real people of Israel. So even though we live today in a different century, and since Nostra Aetate, the Church has changed its dogma on the Jewish people, but actually the fact this notion that Jews are not allowed to have their own country, Jews have no right to come back to their places of origin, to the land of their fathers, and ridiculous sayings like Jews are colonialist, but we are colonialist. I can trace back my lineage through the great commentator of the Torah, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo, the son of Isaac, who lived in Troyes in France, and he can trace it back to King David of Jerusalem. So I can trace 3,000 years of my lineage back to Jerusalem. And they talking about being colonialist.
Right. In Europe, they tell us to go back home, and here they tell us to go back to Europe. Right. So something.
So, and I would like to say that the Kabbalists call our world as the world of lies, while the world to come is the world of truth. The amount of untruth, lies, and fake news coming today through the new media, through the social networks, has topped everything we have seen before. And these untruths, these lies, which do not only pertain to Jewish people and to Israel, they are undoing our way of life and our ways of democratic countries with elections and with opinion polls, because it destroys the notion of truth.
Looking ahead, what is your message specifically to the younger generation of Jews, not just in Europe, across the world? Because I have to say, for people from my generation, we really thought that anti-Semitism was a thing of the past. And unfortunately, we've had a rude awakening, to say the least, since October 7th. How can we navigate the complex challenges of preserving Jewish identity, but also confronting this rise in anti-Semitism? And as you said, not being the defenseless Jew, but the Jew that rises up and faces challenges and faces the hate and fights against it.
I think that one of the good parts, or let's say the silver lining of the tragic events of the October 7th and the aftermath, is it brought together our youth, and our youth which defended our people and our country in a magnificent way, in a heroic way. And I think that every young Jew should know, number one, that you have people down the street who live down the street who you might not know, who want to kill you. It doesn't matter if you live in Paris, in Berlin, or in Ashdod. And number two, you cannot run away from your Jewish identity, and you cannot run away from your Jewish destiny. So you might as well do the best to do whatever it needed to live a life of a proud Jew and defend yourself, and you cannot do that alone. You can only do it together with everyone else.
Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt, thank you very much for joining us today and for bringing us your inspiring message.
Thank you for having me.